I'm Crosby Kemper, the director of the Kansas City Public Library, and this is the second in our series of forums with the Citizens Association. We're very grateful to the Citizens Association for holding these at the library. We're grateful to you for being here. We need to be doing this in Kansas City. We need organizations like the Citizens Association, maybe specifically the Citizens Association, to act as an independent voice in our politics, a voice that is driven by what is good public policy and not by self-interest. And I think that is the role that they're playing tonight. I do want to mention a couple of upcoming programs at the library that I think might be of interest to this group. We have William Hoagland back as a fine historian, an award-winning historian, talking about the founders and founding finance, how debt, speculation, foreclosures, protests, and crackdowns made us a nation. That actually was in the 1790s, not the 2000s. And he'll be here at Central Library on Wednesday, April 17th. We have an early literacy symposium. This is the second in a series. We're working very closely with the mayor on his third grade reading project, the National League of Cities project, working closely with many educational institutions and reading programs in the city to turn this into a community of readers, Kansas City into a community of readers. And we have Susan Bard of the American Library Association's Every Child Ready to Read project here on April 20th, actually the Plaza branch on April 20th. And then the last two I want to mention that are this month, Chuck Haddock, who many of you know as Chuck Haddock, the fish fry, will be talking about in our ongoing Missouri Valley history series about the Coon Sanders Nighthawk Orchestra. As some of you will know, and all of you should know, jazz on the radio, and indeed national radio, actually started in Kansas City. And the Coon Sanders Nighthawk Orchestra being broadcast from the Mulebach Hotel on WHB was actually the first national musical broadcast. Spectacular stuff, and Chuck will tell us all about it on Sunday, April 21st. And last but not least, I want to mention, because it's fitting in this forum, we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to have a conversation on April 22nd with Jim Lehrer, the NewsHour. And many of you know Jim is a relatively speaking, a local boy who's made good. And we're going to be talking about debates. We're going to be talking about presidential debates. We'll be talking about how he grew up in this part of the country. We'll be talking about what's happened to the news media, and that should be pretty interesting. And last but not least, in May 22nd, as part of our ongoing series, What Works in Urban Education, we'll have Michelle Rhee, who is the former superintendent of schools in Washington, D.C., and the head of an organization called Students First now. If I see a lot of faces I haven't seen before, you'd like to get on our mailing list, out on the table out here, you can sign up very easily on this card. You'll get our calendars, our weekly email about our programs. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dan Coffrin, the head of the Citizens Association. I just want to make a pitch, which I think he'll also make, but I'm an independent voice on this. Citizens Association is doing great work. These forums, we've already done a forum on city financial planning. We plan to do one on the airport, which looks after today to also be timely. You'll hear more from Dan about these upcoming events. It's important that we rebuild the Citizens Association. It needs members. It needs you to join. I've joined, and I think it's important. Wherever you stand on the issues, it's important to have an independent public voice. Dan represents that. He's done a great job reestablishing the importance of the Citizens Association, and now I'm happy to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Crosby. On behalf of the Citizens Association, I'm pleased to welcome you to our second forum. We call it the Citizens Forum. We're very pleased to do it in cooperation and partnership with the Kansas City Library. We both, in a sense, have the same mission. The Citizens Association, as Kansas City's oldest nonpartisan, independent political organization, and similarly the library, we see ourselves as forums for the exercise of municipal citizenship. Citizenship they used to teach in the schools, I understand they don't do that anymore, so we're doing our bit. A big part of citizenship is educating the public about what's going on in their city and engaging them in the process. So these series of forums are one of several things we're doing to help inform the people in a comprehensive, unbiased, and frank way about what's going on in their city regarding different important issues of the day. As Crosby said, we're a membership organization. We've placed at each seat a little flyer telling you a little bit about the organization and inviting you to join. So I won't say anything more about that now, other than that I hope that some of you will take the opportunity to join. It's $50 a year, whether that's an individual or a couple, and because it takes money to put on events like this for the postage and the printing and the food, which I hope you have enjoyed. So before we get started here, I want to recognize a few people. We're lucky to have with us a number of our elected officials in Kansas City, both current folks and past elected officials. If I miss someone, let me know when I finish up here. But from not so long ago, Bill Skaggs, where's Councilman Skaggs? He was on the City Council until just 4 or 5 years ago. John Fairfield, who's on our Board of Directors, also a former City Councilman. John, where are you? Wave. Okay. Jim Glover, current City Councilman. Councilman Glover, how are you? Former Mayor Richard Berkeley. Dick, please stand up. And yes, he's taking pictures. John Sharp, Councilman Sharp, who is the chair of our Public Safety Committee on the City Council. We're very pleased to have you here this evening. Another former mayor, Kay Barnes. Mayor Barnes, where are you? There you are. And from the beautiful Northland, Scott Wagner, Councilman Wagner. And you got to clap for Scott. And Dick Davis. I think I saw Dick Davis come in. There's Dick right there. This is a very timely topic about the governance for our police department. As you know, the mayor recently appointed a blue ribbon commission to look at the pros and cons of having our current form of governance with a separate board of police commissioners versus some form of direct control. That commission had its first meeting this week, which I was pleased to attend, and we've got some of those folks here. If you'll just bear with me, we have both of the co-chairs. Again, Mayor Barnes, over here. You can stand up again, Kay. Pat McInerney, where's Pat? There's Pat McInerney. Pat is a former police board commissioner. And I also saw Brad Lemon in the room. Where's Brad? He's a police officer. Bayless Tate. Where's Mr. Tate? There he is. Bayless is a former police commissioner. I saw Beth Lowe. Didn't I see Beth Lowe walk in? There she is right there. Former state rep. And Sandy Skaggs, the better half of Bill Skaggs. Where's Sandy? She's also on the commission. In addition, it takes a lot of work to put these forums together. We do a lot of research ahead of time and a lot of thinking about how to present the issues so that we're being fair and also frank at the same time. And so we always have a couple of Citizens Association board member co-chairs who work with me on putting these together. So I'd like to ask Jim Rice and Cheryl Bisbee. They're in the back of the room, panting, for all the hard work they did. Thank you very much for all the work that you put in on this. Okay, let's get down to business. Tonight we're going to talk about cops and how we govern law enforcement in Kansas City. As you may have gathered from the little background paper that we had at each chair, we have a unique situation here in Kansas City where our police department is governed by a board of police commissioners, all residents of Kansas City, Missouri, but they're appointed by our governor as well as the mayor. This is a system that goes back to 1874. We've had it continuously since then, with the exception of a brief period in the 1930s. St. Louis, until last summer, had the same situation. We were the only two cities, I think, in the country that had this sort of governance model. The folks in St. Louis, actually in a statewide vote that I'm sure many of you participated in, have decided to go to a direct control of their police department. So that, of course, is something that many Kansas Cityans are interested in now. That's why the mayor has appointed his Blue Ribbon Commission looking at it. So we thought it would be a service to the community if we could conduct a forum giving people an opportunity to learn what the facts are. You know, why do we have this form of governance? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the issues? What are the different perspectives on the issues? So we put together a panel that I'd like to introduce to you this evening. First of all, closest to me, Carl Zobrist. Carl is a former member of the Board of Police Commissioners. Carl served from 2000 until 2010, a full 10 years. You've probably got a special pin for that or something, right?
I don't know. I think I did.
Yeah, apparently not.
No pension.
Okay, no pension. No, don't bring that up. That's next month. Next to Carl, former Chief of Police Jim Corwin. Jim was our Chief of Police from 2004 until 2011. He's well known to many of us. Next to him, Councilman Ed Ford. This is Ed's fourth term on the City Council, so he knows what he's talking about. He's, as he says before, he served under 4 different mayors. And he's currently serving on the City Council. He chairs our Planning, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee. And then at the end, in the handsome yellow sweater, and the smile there, our friend Steve Glorioso. Steve is a former Chief of Staff to Mayor Barnes, and most recently, he ran the campaign for giving St. Louis the opportunity to go to direct control, the campaign here in the Kansas City area. So he's very well versed on the issues. This, of course, is a moderated panel, and so I'm pleased at this point to introduce our moderator, someone who probably needs no introduction, right, Dave? Dave Helling of the Kansas City Star. Everybody, I think, probably knows Dave from his work on the Star, and before that with one of the local television stations. Politics has been one of his areas of special interest. He did a lot of work, I know, when the St. Louis folks were considering changing their form of governance, so we thought that Dave would be a great guy to lead tonight's discussion. Dave, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dan, for that introduction. Thanks, of course, to the Citizens Association and the library for putting this together. Very important conversation. And let me just briefly say, it is a conversation. We don't have formal rules. It's not opening statements. We don't have time limits. We're just going to talk about this. And if you want to be a part of that conversation, as you should, raise your hand. I'll come to you, give you the mic. We'll get a real good exchange going because we really want to try and illuminate this issue. I actually have a couple of goals tonight. The first is to have a good conversation about an important issue of public concern. Second, I want to avoid arrest, if possible, when the get-together is over. And then finally, I want to increase subscriptions to the Kansas City Star. So after the session, I'll have a small booth outside, and if you are not a subscriber at this point, we'll be happy to take your money. Again, we're talking about the governance model for the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. So, Carl, let me start with you. Why do we do things the way we do in Kansas City in terms of supervising our police department?
Well, the idea began actually in 1939. The previous statute was invalidated by the Supreme Court for reasons that are really not important here. It had to do with money. And so in 1939, it was the governor of Missouri at the time that had just witnessed a series of violent civil elections here in Kansas City, particularly in 1936 and 1938, and he was appalled by the violence in our streets. And what he did is follow what had been, up until that time, the standard model for troubled police departments. It had been followed by New York. It had been followed by Baltimore. In fact, one of the, before Teddy Roosevelt actually ran for governor of New York, his last position was as president of the New York Board of Police Commissioners. And the idea was to develop a system that would remove politics, that would ingrain merit and integrity in this community and perpetuate it, for the foreseeable future. And so Governor Lloyd Stark, who was a reform governor, sent a message to the General Assembly, which was very eloquent, describing all the bloodshed on the street and why we needed to have a change in Kansas City. And the thing that distinguishes us, and has distinguished us until just last year when St. Louis did away with its procedure, was that Kansas City and all of its officers, and more importantly, the Board of Police Commissioners, were removed from politics. Although you were appointed, as I was, by 2 Democratic governors, Mel Carnahan and Bob Holden, once you take that oath of office, you can't write checks, you get to hang up with politicians, and although once you get off the board, they do come and visit you and say, you haven't sent me a check for a while. But for that period of time, you are absolutely insulated from politics. And the idea was to establish an ironclad civil service governed by non-political officials. And that's really where it began.
Ed, why should the police department be insulated from politics, or should it be? I mean, it's the most important function of any government, the police power. It spends almost half of the city budget. Why should the officers, in your view, or should they be insulated from politics?
No, I'm a First Amendment guy. I don't believe they give up their First Amendment rights because they belong to the police department. I think they have the same right as any other citizen.
No, but I mean, why? But Carl, in his opening remarks, said, hey, the whole idea in 1939 was corruption, influence of elected officials, improper influence. Is that still a danger today in your view? I mean, or, you know, if it isn't a danger, why are we even having this conversation? Walk us through why, in your view, we need to re-examine this governance model, if you do.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's interesting that in every other city in the country, regardless of size, they have local control. And yet, none of those communities are examining why they would want to go to state control. So you have to consider how unique we are in terms of our governance model. If state control is superior, then why aren't those communities clamoring to switch their governance model? And what is it about being a Kansas City resident that makes us incapable of governing our own police department?
Is that what it says? Jim, in your view, is that what the governance model says now, that the people of this community are somehow incapable or not qualified to oversee its police function? Is that what's happening now?
Absolutely not. And Mr. Ford is actually my council representative, and I voted for Ed. And I think Ed's done a really great job in all the 4 terms he's been there. And I think it's real important that we talk right now that this is not a personal thing. We've had great mayors, great council people, people there for the right reasons. And I think Kansas City is a great city because of that. However, being the CEO of an organization that really got to report to a professional board of directors, you got to run the organization like a business without
Talking about the police department, right, Jim?
Right,
yeah.
Without the threat of any kind of phone call saying, you better not do that or else. The else came basically from the board of directors that said that according to the statistics and everything else, the reports, it was professionally run. What I will say, unfortunately, many of the major metropolitan communities in our country are presently under consent decrees by the U.S. Justice Department for a variety of different reasons. Things usually from civil rights violations to a lot of other things, which is important because the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department has never had a consent decree ruled against us in any fashion. The other part that's very, very important.
What a consent decree is.
A consent decree basically is a ruling where the Justice Department sues a city because of a violation of a civil rights problem. More importantly,
Suggesting, Jim, that just so we're clear, that a police board setup ensures that you won't have that kind of problem with the federal government?
I wouldn't say ensures anything, but what I do say is basically it is proven. It's proven in the record and statistics that we have not had that. What I will say, if a city goes under a consent decree, it will cost the citizens of that city millions of dollars to correct it. For example, New Orleans is right now going through a consent problem, and they're at the tune of basically around $20 million to fix it. And that's probably a low figure.
Steve, how are we to judge this before we sort of go into the nitty-gritty of how it might work? How are the people of this community, in your view, supposed to make a decision over whether local control, what we call local control, is a good idea or not? I mean, is it the crime rate? Is it the cost of the department? Is it the problems in the force itself? Corruption, that type of thing? Walk us through how we are to set a yardstick to decide whether this is good or not.
I think maybe be real quick how St. Louis did it. And we don't need to do it the way St. Louis did it because we don't like St. Louis, right? The darn Cardinals. They were at it for quite a while, and they had, I'm not doing this in exact chronological order, but the mayor and council put on the ballot a non-binding resolution to seek the input of the people of St. Louis, and 71% said they wanted to run, they were in favor of democracy. They wanted to run their own police department and be able to hold elected officials accountable for the operation of the police function in St. Louis. They also went through quite a few meetings with major stakeholders. One of the turning points was when they got the Civic Progress, which was the same as our Civic Council, which is the top corporate leaders in St. Louis endorsed the idea. At one point, the Police Officers Association, they call it Police Officers Association, endorsed it, and then later on they went neutral, kind of back and forth. But they did put together a piece of legislation, because see, it's a state law that governs, or did govern, the city of St. Louis and now the city of Kansas City. And they wrote their own bill, and it included very strong prohibition against political interference. It gave protection to whistleblowers. It's a very strong statute. It also protected the pension of the police department, which is another big issue, which is part of the state plan, I believe. And so they did all those things, but then they couldn't get the legislature of the state to give up the power to oversee the department. And so they went to a statewide petition drive. So it was about a 2-year process, and then a vote, and the vote was overwhelming. Out of 114 counties, I don't think it failed anywhere, which to me showed that the idea of local control is universal, that people want to control the things that affect their daily lives. And so I think, do we want to do that, Dave? You know, I hope we don't drag this out. We either, I think, make a decision by the end of the year, ask the legislature to do it.
But again, Steve, how are we to decide whether it's a good idea or not? What do you say, let's go to local control because it will reduce the murder rate? Or do we go to local control because it will cost less? Or because we want democracy in our police department?
I think that's a whole package. You're hitting on all the major functions. Again, I go back to the fact that we live in a democracy, and yet we have a major function of our city eating up 47% of our general fund, and we basically are being run indirectly from afar. I will say Jim Corwin, who I thought was a good chief and worked with him when I worked for Kay Barnes, I do believe the Justice Department is all over the city police department currently for their testing method. Isn't that true? I mean, they haven't done a decree or anything, but evidently they have seen or believe there's some problem with how we go about recruiting officers. And so I don't think, there's no purity anywhere that I know of.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Jim, if you want.
I just say I have not received any phone calls.
We'll work on verifying that fact. Carl, Steve suggests that the police board governance system is anti-democratic, small d democratic.
Well, it was the democratically elected governor and the legislature of the state that imposed this, and it's been working for 70 years. So, I mean, I don't think...
How do we know if it's been working? When you say it's been working, what does that mean?
Then let's look at what is the problem. I mean, that's the issue I think that the chief talked about. I mean, the crime rate goes up and it goes down. When the crime rate goes down, does everybody think, the police board is great, and when it goes up, it's not? I mean, we'd be firing and hiring chiefs of police and majors and captains. You have to have a sustained effort. And I think the thing that the chief was referring to is that there has been over the years, I mean, just not when I was on the board, for the last 50, 60 years, there has been a degree of professionalism and an insulation from politics. And when you look at the consent decrees for really serious stuff like use of force, bad pursuit policies, corruption, I mean, those are always tainted by politics. And we've been fortunate here in Kansas City to have, a good form of city government, but I think that the police department has worked well, and I don't see the case being made for change. There are actually some items where costs would go up that I'd be glad to talk about later.
Talk about that in a little bit, but Jim, I think Carl just said that the current system insulates you from politics. Is that really true? I mean, I remember covering a news conference with you and Mark Funkhauser, asking for more money at the Truman Sports Complex, you as police chief and the mayor. You're not completely insulated from politics, are you, Jim? And the officers aren't.
Well, yeah, you are. You absolutely.
Explain to how that works.
You're absolutely, when I took the job as chief of police, I knew I worked at the pleasure of the board. And basically you had to do your job, and you woke up every morning to see if you had 3 votes. So I guess you could say that's kind of political. But more importantly, I guess the point I'm trying to make is I could make decisions based on professionalism, a professional staff making recommendations and placing resources in the right place with never having to worry about a council person, a mayor, somebody basically giving me a phone call and saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to have your butt. Never happened. Never happened. I never even got a phone call about fixing a traffic ticket. I mean, and that's a big deal. I mean, that is a very, very big deal.
But Jim, are you suggesting that with local control, you would suddenly be inundated with people trying to get their traffic tickets fixed? I mean, that doesn't give much credit to elected officials in this community.
What will happen, though, what I say is no, not with our current, I think, elected people. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, when you set
That's good because we have council members in here.
When you set up a system that allows itself to be an open system like that, where you're basically working at the pleasure of the council, and they could get you fired for not doing the right thing, as they would think, then you've got an issue. You ran an organization in a professional manner because you had a professional board of directors to report to, and you had professional police officers doing the hard work. And that's kind of the benchmark and the branding of our organization. And I'm very proud to say I'm a Kansas City police officer because of the reputation, the benchmarks, and the branding that these officers have done over a long period of time. And there's a lot of them in the crowd today, and I want to say publicly thank you for that.
Yeah. Do you have a traffic ticket, by the way, pending, Ed, just so we're clear? John, do you have tickets? Okay, good. Do you really want control of the police department, Ed, as a member of the council?
I think
Isn't what Jim's saying a pretty good idea, that it insulates you from criticism when people call and say, hey, the cops aren't doing this? You can say, hey, it's really not my responsibility.
Well, I think Jim kind of touched on an important issue. Yes, you are insulated, but you're also being insulated from the public by being insulated from their elected representatives. Give you an example. I chair planning and zoning. We have professionals that make recommendations to the council on zoning. We seek neighborhood input on development. Almost without exception, we get a better development when we have a neighborhood buy-in and series of meetings. Absolutely. And I see that missing from our current status quo. I think we have an excellent police department, an excellent board of police commissioners. I don't have any complaints about them, and neither does the public. But the public is concerned about crime. And crime is the #1 issue for elected local representatives. It's like asking Mayor Berkeley to take photos tonight and take his camera away. You can't do the job. Public safety is more than the police department, and I think we've insulated the police department from the community.
Right, you insulate from politics, but maybe accountability as well. And yet, Steve, you do hear this theme a lot from officers. Every time I write about this, I get a call from officers saying, well, yeah, but there's nothing, it's not bad now. We've got a lot of problems in this community. This is the least sort of compelling one that we need to face. Why don't you answer that, and then we'll, again, raise your hand if you have a question or an observation. Go ahead.
Well, there's several things that, there's no perfect system, first of all, and there's no perfection anywhere that I've ever seen. I mean, we have a good police department. My own interaction with them has always been very professional. But unless I did the math wrong, we have a higher murder rate than Chicago. They have a murder for about every 5,000 citizens. We now have a murder based on the last full year, roughly around 4,000 and some per citizen. Does that mean that they get a lot more attention because there's a lot more dead bodies laying around for TV cameras to film? But so does that make us a bad police department? No. But it just shows you there's just not we're not the best, we're not the worst, we're good. Number two, I think that when you go about changing structures, I think the current police board is good. But you can't make changes based on the fact that Pat McInerney is an outstanding member of the commission, and Carl was. I mean, when Kay Barnes tried to do strong mayor, and Cleaver tried to do strong mayor, and then Funkhauser came along, and no one wanted to talk about strong mayor because, he messed everything up without the power. When we're considering this, try to take the individuals out of it. And also, I think one thing Jim said, I take exception to. I have the greatest respect for the professionalism of the city staff. Randy Landis over here, finance, Troy Schulte. Jim did run his department professionally, but if he reports to the city manager, he's still reporting to a professional. It's not like at least the one I wouldn't see is right now in our structure, the chief wouldn't report to the mayor. Now in St. Louis they will, because they have a strong mayor form of government. And I think, I've been thinking about this all day, and this idea of politics just just drives me crazy. First of all, politics is the end result of the political process. One of the greatest people I ever knew, Dick Bowling, said that over and over. We have politics all through the police department. First of all, there's politics within the department. When the police try not to merge the jails, when the police didn't want to merge the health insurance, they were trying to, in part, protect jobs. People who had the jobs. And when you merge, just like when companies merge, you lose people. But, the governor basically suggests to the police board who the police attorney ought to be. At least they used to. I don't know what the experience was with the current attorney. And one last thing. There was a guy who was one of my very best friends in the world. Ronnie DePasqua was a state senator. He was called the policeman's best friend. He and I were such good friends that then my former wife and I got married in 1981. We had our wedding reception in his tavern at 12th and Cleveland. I was with Ronnie a lot. The chief called him all the time. Ronnie called the chief. He called the chief and said, so-and-so I think should get a promotion he's up for. Because he handled all their bills in Jeff City. He also, that bar was the safest tavern in Kansas City. You go down there day or night. Matter of fact, the night of the reception, there was a cop car on that end of 12th and that end of 12th, and one up on Cleveland. And I said, Ronnie, you didn't have to hire security, because it was Northeast. And he says, oh, no, they're just doing that as a favor for me. So we had 3 policemen tied up all night long because I had a wedding reception, and Ronnie was their guy in Jeff City. The legislature suggests who the lobbyists ought to be. So, it's just different political pressure. And I'd rather have it close to home. I'd like to know who's doing it and be able to say, Ed, why are you interfering with the police department?
Okay, great. Let's open this up. I'll go over here and then come back here and we'll have some discussion. By the way, while I'm going over here, Joanne Collins is here. I don't know if, Dan, if you got her, but former Councilwoman Joanne Collins. And Al Brooks is here too. So, and Scott Taylor is here. I didn't see him. So go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question.
My name is Tom Gee. I'm a retired police officer, Kansas City. Mr. Glorioso, how does direct control of the police department reduce the murder rate and reduce the crime rate? I'm a professional in this area.
Yeah.
I would like to hear your theory. Thank you.
Well, the reason I brought it up was the comment was made that we somehow, this is a better system than other people had. What I'm suggesting is you can use all sorts of measurements to say, well, if you use the murder rate, then we're not. Because we have a higher murder rate than Chicago. Well, but that isn't fair. I mean, we have burglary, we have all sorts of things. I was just making a comparison, that's all, to say that how do you measure.
But are you suggesting, Steve, that if you went to local governments, the murder rate would come down?
No, but I think what Ed referred to earlier is being able to integrate all the functions of city government more closely with the police, because, murder is not just, murder is a multifaceted thing other than the actual act of murdering someone. And, the whole thing of social services, et cetera, et cetera. I just think it's something that works.
And then I'm coming over here.
Let me just, I think there is a disconnect between the police department and the minority community in town. It's evidenced by the fact of the anti-snitching, that you have people who know who shot someone and they don't come forward. The fact that we don't have enough officers of color serving in the urban core.
You think local control corps would solve that or help solve that? Do you think that's even a problem?
While I was on the board, we were very concerned about minority hiring, and I see 2 of my good buddies down there, and we talked about that a lot, Deputy Chief Hundley and some of these other officers, and that was always a concern. And we made some strides, but we could do more. The other thing that I fear is that if you put this into a political process, you're not going to have the chief of police, and Jim Corwin ought to talk about this, allocate the resources to those divisions like, Metro and Center and East that really have the crime problems that you'll have, because you'll have politicians from north of the river. Let me finish. Yeah. You'll have politicians north of the river complaining about lousy response times because they are higher north of the river, but crime over there can be managed better than it can in the inner city. And Chief Forte and Chief Corwin have done a better job, in my opinion, because they've been released from these day-to-day political things of fighting fighting inner city crime.
But let me just follow up, and then in this question, your predecessor on the board was Jeff Simon, who lived north of the river.
No, he didn't. No, Jeff lives in Brookside.
Was not,
Brookside.
Regardless
Right, okay.
Of my fact error, which I just made. Regardless, if the board members are not making those arguments, then what good are they? I mean, why, if Ed can't make that argument, more officers north of the river because I think I have a problem, if you're not making that argument for whatever you think is important, why even have a board?
Let me say this. I mean, I reject, Ed's comment about that we're not connected to the community. I mean, all the homes associations that I've gone to throughout the city, I've always seen a ton of officers there. I mean, they're not AWOL. In fact, I usually go to the officers and say, what have you been talking to these people about? Are you here? And then I'll go to the homes association folks and the neighborhood people to say, are these cops talking to you? And my impression was, for the 10 years I was on the board, that there was a lot of community action. Now, maybe there weren't city council people there, but I think that this department is very much well connected to the community.
Let's try this again, Ed. Do you really want to be in a position where you're calling the chief of police and saying, put more police officers in my neighborhood?
No, but I want to be in a position to call a meeting and have police officers there and talk about,
Can't do that now?
About crime.
Can you do that now?
I can ask, but that's it. We have our primary obligation is to provide for the public safety of our citizens. We spend 46 cents of every dollar of the general fund for that, and yet issues such as community policing, for example, which I thought we were making great strides, that went away. That was over the objection of the council. Minority officers, I'm told the problem is they hire them, but then after they get some experience, they get recruited away. Well, I think if you had an engaged city council, that wouldn't happen.
Okay, question here.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Toohey. I have a quick question. I understand that the opponents in St. Louis were concerned about the 1,000-some-odd aldermen they have in the city and introducing that, the politics there.
I think.
And we don't have that model here, but in the short time since St. Louis has changed, is there any information that's
No.
that can help us?
The effective date is July 1, and I talked to the Mayor Slay, who was just reelected Tuesday, chief of staff today to find out, But he said because of the mayor's election, which started, of course, back in November, right about the time of the statewide vote, they haven't, everything's put on hold. He said the one thing that they have done is that they don't have a citizen review or a review of, what's it called?
Citizen Review
Office
Board.
of Citizen Complaints?
Citizen review.
OCC.
What do you call it?
OCC,
You mean
Office
the
of Citizen
Community
Complaints.
Yes. It's not a citizen because it's a police do the investigation.
No, it's not.
Is that
It
true?
is a civilian board that reports to the Board of Police Commissioners. Internal Affairs does the investigation. If it is found to be flawed, it goes back and they do it again. So
But
let me
who
make
does the
that real
investigation?
clear. Well, you simply use the internal affairs to do the work.
Okay.
And I can tell you that I have cast at least 2 or 3 votes, one against this chief to say, no, the board gets to decide if this officer is disciplined.
Okay. Anyway,
So
point
it is
was
an
that
independent
they are
system.
studying that. They're trying to figure out what the best. They've got a little task force working on that, but really nothing's happened.
Question here.
How you doing? I'm Sam Abadir. I'm wondering why you think that local control is even going to be a good idea based on the history of Kansas City with local services and safety services. If we look at things such as the massed ambulance service, after you took that over, we fell below national standards. If you look at something as tragic as what happened at JJ's, we saw that the fire department left before it was evacuated. That doesn't meet national standards. That's locally controlled. If we look at our water and sewer services, it took a federal lawsuit to get your guys' attention to actually do something about it. You guys seem to be more concerned about doing things like Citadel Plaza and other things that get you on TV than actually looking at what's actually making us safer and better.
Okay. Let's hold our applause, really, because Ed, you want to take that one? And then Jim?
Obviously, I was on a different side on some of the votes on mast and all that, but that being said, no, I am held accountable by the voters. Carl isn't. Okay, it's very simple. And yet, if someone has a problem with public safety in their neighborhood, they're calling me, they're not calling Carl.
And what's your answer when someone calls you? Do you say, call Carl, Ed, or what? How do you deal with that?
It depends on the nature. For example, we had a real problem, continue to have a real problem with cars being broken into. And I did ask a police officer to come over. I asked the city prosecutor to come over. And what I found out is they knew who was breaking into the cars. They knew it was these 3 guys who had been arrested repeatedly. And it's like...
Okay, we have another question over here. Hold on just a second. Just a second. Go ahead, I'll pass this over.
Good evening. My name is John McAdam. I'm a retired sergeant of Kansas City Police Department. Steve, I would like to point out, I think you made a very strong argument, unintentionally, against city control when you talked about Ronnie DePasco having 3 cars there available for your wedding. You talked about getting the phone call about the ticket that was issued. That's called professional courtesy. And I'm certain that it was...
ticket that was... I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
What did you say about tickets? I'm sorry.
About a ticket, and for a politician, it would be called a professional courtesy. We'd give some type of consideration. I rode the area of the former mayor's house out in south of Luce Park, wrote tickets to the mayor all day long because his children didn't seem to want to respect the laws. Another point, I can share some history briefly. My family's been a part of this community in the fire service for 113 years. I spent 30 years with the Kansas City Police Department. My aunt, my father's only sister, was indicted following the 1936 election that led to the state control, and she was indicted for a vote fraud. My father was on the fire department, a young captain, and he was, luckily that he was not indicted, but the point was he was a fireman, he carried a poll book, and that was expected by the politicians. He also was hired by Mr. Pendergast.
Thanks. Yeah, well, the
you want to talk about that?
Well, the point I was making about the late Senator DePasco was that it's state control, and yet we had the politics. It's not insulated just because it's in the state. I mean, we have Senator Curls has just introduced a bill that would, if it were to pass, that would change how you dismiss a fire chief. If that isn't, I mean, you can call it meddling, you can call it a great idea. But the fact that this idea that, you know, just because it's in Jeff City and it's not here, I'd rather have it here. I don't. Now, you know, we've had governors interfere with the police. I mean, not interfere because he's the governor, he or she. One day, maybe, during the riots back in '68. Warren Hearns got very active regarding what was going on in Kansas City. So politics is everywhere, whether it's here or there, and I'd rather have it here. And I think we can have lots of protections. The St. Louis board, I mean, their legislation has some strong language. And one other quick thing, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch did an independent study of what it will save them, and it'll save them about a minimum of $3.5 million to go to local control.
Okay.
Let me I want to say 2 things. First of all, in terms of the politicians, I mean, I was on the police board for 10 years. I never got the call once from the governor or any senior staffer that told me to do X. Now, when we had an incident, they might say, tell us about the incident. I mean, the local control versus state control is a misnomer. What we're talking about is local political control versus local non-political control. And in terms of phone calls, Ed, I got a lot of phone calls. I got a lot of phone calls from members of the city council. I know McInerney did. I know Thompson did. I know a lot of people did. And we also spent time, having liaisons with members of the city council. And I understand the KCPD still shows up for public safety sales, or public safety committees at City Hall. I mean, if that's not happening, that's a change from when I was on the board.
How do you answer this argument that if the citizens don't like what you do, they can't vote you out of office? Or Jim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I will take it because what happens is, I don't know, and I think almost everybody in this room has been to a police board meeting. Because you're active, you wouldn't be here tonight. I can tell you, a police board meeting, which happens twice a month, it can get very, very lively. To a point where it sometimes gets very hostile because people are allowed to speak their mind and bring up their issues. And basically what happens is that issue is brought up and it's taken care of. It's basically given to somebody to handle.
But what if it isn't taken care of?
Well, I'm going to give you an example of something that was said earlier about how good the police department operated. John Anderson is sitting in the front row. And something tragic happened while I was a deputy chief and Carl Zobrist was on the board. Something very tragic happened. It was a police chase, car chase, that went through around the 79th and State Line area. And unfortunately, a bicyclist was killed involving this bicycle. and car chase. I'm sitting on the front row of the board meeting. Mr. Anderson comes up and gives an eloquent presentation about what was going on and basically told us our policy was bunk.
Our pursuit policy.
Our pursuit policy was terrible. And Carl Zobus, I think you were the president of the board at that particular time, and you looked at me and you said, you're going to chair the committee, and you're going to work with John Anderson, and you guys are going to come up with a policy. We worked on that policy for a year. Wasn't pretty at first. Had lots of discussions and things that happened to that. We came out with a model policy, a national model policy that's now currently being copied by other police departments in the country. The point I'm trying to make is when people come to the police board or bring the attention to the police department, things happen and they happen professionally.
Steve, let's clean up another thing, and then I think we have a question here, maybe here. Let's clean up this issue, though, that was raised a few minutes ago, and that is, and this is what I hear all the time, is why would you want to give the police department to the city when they can't do water, they can't do ambulance, they can't do fire, they can't do schools? Why give it to them? I mean, that's really the crux of what a lot of people are concerned about. Steve?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Why would you do that?
First of all, I think we have, like I said, a good police department. I think we also have on whole a pretty good city government that's professionally run. We've had our problems, just like other departments have, where there's been people that have broken the law or broken the rules. But again, it still comes back to, you know, when I sat in Kay's office, she had to leave for 4 years. I remember time and again, you know, the health insurance, the IT, the garage, the personnel, the human resources. Why not consolidate them? Why are they separate? Like I said, St. Louis, and I would assume the paper did an independent study. We can save a lot of money. When you have the city, the police, 47% of the general fund, they're really the tail wagging the dog. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I remember one time, you know, we had a policy in the city. It's humorous when you look back on it now that 58% of Americans are okay with gay and lesbians marrying. We had what's called domestic partner benefits, and Kay was a huge supporter of it, and we had it. And she wanted it at the police department. And I think it did happen, right, Jim, a year or two later?
Yes.
But I mean, there was a public policy decision that we couldn't get the police to join the rest of the. I mean, they're city employees. I mean, the board is appointed by the board, but I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Why wouldn't we have things that we thought was good public policy also impact those other city employees?
Let me flip the question for Carl and ask you. The flip side of that coin is, if state control or the governance system that now exists is so good, why are we the only city in the country that has it? I mean, that's what you hear from the other side all the time is, why isn't every other city in America going, look at Kansas City. They don't have political influence. They're doing a great job. Let's go to state control.
Well, I mean, I really can't answer that except to say that I think the political process, you know, eroded the boards, and maybe they weren't good boards. Maybe they didn't have our statute. I mean, I know New York used to have one. Like I said, Roosevelt used to be a commissioner there. Baltimore used to have one. There used to be one in St. Joe. I really don't know the answer to that question. I mean, to me, the more pertinent question is this working? I mean, we may be the only, you know, true democracy that has a First Amendment. I mean, the United Kingdom doesn't have a First Amendment. Are we going to get rid of our First Amendment because we're the only ones that do? The question is does this work? Is it efficient? Does it serve the citizens? I think that's the real question.
Question here.
My name is Pat Kenora, and I just want to introduce another aspect that when I was thinking about this, I thought, you know, it seems to me we need to work very closely with Kansas City, Kansas, if we're addressing problems that affect us both. And it seems to me if we had local control of our police department, and they have local control of theirs, I presume, we'd have a much better chance because we're facing similar problems. So it sounds good to me.
Absolutely. You're spot on. You're absolutely right. And I am very proud to say that this police department, as well as the other metropolitan agencies in the area, work extremely well together. And I'll give you an example. The Attorney General was in town when I was the Chief of Police. Gonzalez, I believe, was the Attorney General at the time. And he was brand new. There's just been a point he was doing his tours of the cities. And he came to Kansas City. And, of course, the U.S. Attorney at that time invited all the police chiefs in the area to come to the meeting. As we're sitting around this large table, we're all discussing what was going on. And it was basically a kumbaya session. All the chiefs knew each other. We're all talking about the issues and nice meeting. We're walking out of this meeting. And I just happened to be behind the staffer that was in front of Gonzalez. And he turns over his shoulder to the staffer and says, "Are these people blowing smoke up my dress?" And he says, "No, sir, they actually get along here."
Question here?
Thank you. Jim.
Yes.
I am Johnny Anderson for anybody that cares.
We all care.
Regarding the pension situation, my understanding is that many of the police officers are concerned or would like to have local control of the pension. I understand right now there's a state statute that says the state will control the pension program. So even if we get local control, is it not the case that it would take a change in, a state statute change in Jeff City to allow the local control of the pension?
Right. The current pension is actually controlled by a separate board, but the issue is out there that all police officers, and I'd say that it goes through a timeline. When you first come on the job, you don't care about pensions or anything else. You'd work for free. I mean, it's that much fun. And as you get farther along into the organization, about 10 years down the road, you start making career decisions, and you start paying attention, like what's my benefits. As you get towards the end, you're doggone tootin' you're paying attention to that pension because that's what you've worked hard for. And that pension fund right now is in the neighborhood of $800 million, give or change, a couple of cents. Getting close to $1 billion fund, that's big money. And certainly the rank and file see that as they want to keep it, they want to protect it, and they don't want that to go to some other way other cities have gone, where they start tapping into that for other payoffs.
Do you want Ed to tap into the pension of not just the police department, but fire and others?
We have to get control of the pensions, whether it's police, fire, public works, city officials. It's not a sustainable model. Now, why? Because we can't afford to pay folks 20, 30, 40 years after they leave the force. 50% of their salary? Is that what we're paying? Mm-hmm. What are we paying?
75%.
75% of their salary. I mean, I think everybody in this room who's not a police officer would love a pension like that, but we have 401ks if we're lucky.
Steve, they did, the St. Louis deal was really predicated on this pension question is the most important question, obviously.
Yeah. Well, in order to build political support, they went ahead and left the pension system with the state. But I think there's...
Would Kansas City consider that? I mean, would that be part of...
Yeah, but I think what Ed's pointing out is that, here we go again. We have a city government that I pay taxes. I presume most people here do. And then we've got a whole chunk of the city government over here that we can't in any way manage, we the people manage through our elected officials. If the pension fund, we don't want to rate it, and it's easy enough to protect it from being, I think Jim's talking about rating it to use it for other purposes. But we need to rein in the pension for all city employees. The firemen, my wife over there is looking forward, hope, to the city pension someday. But I think it's just one of these things why do we let this run over here completely out of the control of local government? But really, there is a misnomer. I think John touched on it. Not a misnomer. We are governed by a state law. This is state legislation. So to change it, what St. Louis had to do is that's why we in Kansas City voted on their local control issue, because they had to change a state statute, the same one that governs Kansas City Police. So to change it, we have to get the legislature to do it, or have the legislature allow a statewide ballot, or somewhere get enough money to do a statewide petition drive like St. Louis did and put it on the ballot. So it's all one package.
I want to get to the mod. Go ahead.
I just want to clarify one thing. Yeah. Police board governance of the KCPD is what we're talking about tonight. The pension board is an entirely different part of the statute, and it's set aside, and it does have folks on that board that are appointed by the mayor of Kansas City. So that's a different issue, and the finances are a different issue. What we're talking about here tonight, and it's important, I don't mean to say it's not important, it's very important to people, but the police board has nothing to do with pensions in this town. That's a different kettle of fish.
Right here.
Brad Lemon, Executive Vice President for Kenora Police. We're willingly sitting down and talking with the Blue Ribbon Commission regarding local control. We have an open mind. We're not saying yes, we're not saying no, but one thing I can absolutely speak to when it comes to pension, there will be no approval by the Kenora Police about local control if pension's even in a discussion. It's going to be, we're going to make sure that it stays under state control because it's been guaranteed that way for our whole lives. It's been our promises. And if there's going to be any discussion about local control, it is going to be without our pension discussion.
And it lasts.
We're willing to consider this as long as they wall off pensions.
And who funds the pensions? Is it the state government or is it city?
The state, but we also fund it also, just like
Yeah,
we don't get Social Security service.
Yeah. But the taxpayer dollars, in other words, part of this 46 cents of every dollar from general fund, which goes to the police department, a good chunk of that's going to the pension fund.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
I guess we could argue this, but because another discussion would be that the city's failed to pay into our pension for a number of years. And by the way,
I want to turn this into a rally.
It's $90 million under budgeted, which we've forgiven in order to get to where we're supposed to be. So we can discuss all day long what's been funded and what's been underfunded.
But there are, Steve, I think you're suggesting in St. Louis they did, and that's when the FOP really bought in St. Louis, right? When they figured out the pension thing.
Right, they could have looped it all into a separate, either, I would think maybe one ballot issue or two separate. I don't know how you would do it, mechanics of that.
Whoop, I'm sorry.
Hey, Dave, while you're back there, let me...
I thought I saw some hands back here. I'm trying to get people who are not officers or retired officers if there's an interest. John? Wait a minute, you get to talk all the time.
John,
You're an elected official. I get to talk all the time, too. Anyone else? An observation? Yes, sir.
Well, what's the response to the city not paying into the pension system? I know this isn't supposed to be a pension thing, but it was thrown up to you and you didn't...
Yeah, I mean, we can pay more money into the pension system and have less officers on the street, pave less roads, less ambulances on it. We have a finite amount of money to address all our needs. And 46 cents of every dollar out of the general fund is going to the police department.
What's the state statute that,
20%.
So you're roughly double. Jim?
Yeah, I think we've kind of touched a little bit about the finances of the police department, but we really need to hone in on this because it'll be talked about a lot about the efficiencies of local control and how much more that's going to save people's money. It will not save money to go under local control, and I'll give you some examples. About 80% of our budget is basically personnel costs. That doesn't go away. The consolidation of all these things we're talking about, fleet, IT, all that stuff, that has been done almost exclusively. That's happened. The HR department, you'll hear this kind of, if you had one HR department, it would save all this money. Well, no, you won't, because if the city could handle all the HR functions for another 2,300 people or 2,100 people, maybe they're overstaffed. You think? But they're not. They don't have the people either. And certainly the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department has a very skeletal staff taking care of the HR needs of 2,100 people. The 46% we're talking about of the budget, right now that's the norm throughout the country, about 46 to 50% for police departments throughout the country.
Jim, let me just real quickly, when you talked about HR staffing and you have a skeletal staff in police department, why couldn't you move those people to the city? They would have enough people to do it.
We actually said that we would actually do the function for the city.
Yeah, I mean,
because we feel
that seems like an obvious solution to me.
Yeah.
to combine those and see what efficiency.
Well, I haven't finished yet. Let me finish my comments. The other part of this thing is what I'm talking about too. Is it says 1/5 or 20% of the entire budget will go to the police department. Right now, that's about what the number is. Because when the statute was written many moons ago, it talked about the general fund. The general fund was different than what it's talked about now. Now we have enterprise funds and other things that aren't part of the general fund. So if you take those things out, we're at about 20% is what we're at right now. So we're actually at the state statute level.
Couple more. Let's go to this lady back here because I want to get a lady in. Yes, ma'am. Stand up if you could. Is that, and then.
Yes. I just want to back up a bit. I'm so happy to hear that the commission meetings are just so exciting because a few years ago, when you went to one of the police commission board meetings, whatever the commission was speaking on at that time, and if you had an issue, you could not speak on what you had to say. You had to more or less speak on what was being discussed. And I thought that was very unfair for the citizens. So I just wanted to mention that when you said that they're so lively now because you couldn't speak then.
Well, Carl's gone now.
Carl, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah,
Let's, we've got a little bit, we're going to wrap up here in about 20 minutes or so, and obviously these guys will stick around for other questions. And raise your hand if you have an observation or question. But let's talk a little bit about what, if you got rid of state control, what would you then go to, Steve? I mean, you can't just say, let's throw the baby out and then tomorrow the mayor's in charge. I mean, what are some models and what are the implications of those models?
Yeah, you'd have, St. Louis has, as I mentioned earlier, a strong mayor form of government. And
we don't.
We don't. So theirs is pretty straightforward. The chief will now report to the mayor just like every other department head in the city. Without doing anything different, the police chief would report to the city manager. I mean, that would just become a department of city government, just like other departments, public works, et cetera. You could also do like a park board. You could have the mayor appoint park commissioner, police commissioners. The mayor right now serves on there. So that would be another, that's how the park department is quasi-separated, but it's still part of the city government.
What if you elected the police board? I mean, so one of the things you've heard here is, hey, they're not accountable to the voters. If you appoint one, it's just a different person picking the name out of the hat.
That's such a single purpose focus. I don't know that we'd want to elect just a strata of city government when we have a mayor and council. Another way to do it would be you could also go the strong mayor, which would be another, every mayor has been mayor in my lifetime and said they'd like to see strong mayor.
That's for the next
But that's a whole other
panel,
thing. But or you could have a public safety department, which would be what I would do. You have a department of public safety. You'd have a director, and the fire chief and the police chief would report to this person who worked for the manager.
What about that idea of having a board, police board, just not appointed by the governor, appointed by the mayor or the council, or the mayor with the agreement of the council? You've got the same basic sort of insulation, but it's more connected locally.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked with a number of elected officials about, other forms of government. And, for example, I mean, one possibility might be to expand the current board to have the council member who chairs the Public Safety Committee, have he or she serve on the board, and then have the mayor choose someone who's not an elected official from the community. I still think having, it would be then you'd have the mayor, the council person, that pick, and then the four folks that come from the governor.
We should point out, by the way, the mayor is on the police board
right,
now.
and the mayor is
and has a vote,
full voting member, yeah. And I think
full of voters.
I mean, that could certainly respond to some folks who think that we're not responsive enough. San Francisco and L.A. do have police boards. They are controlled either by the mayor or by the mayor and the city council. The problem I've seen in L.A. is you elect a new mayor, and the new mayor comes in and fires all the police commissioners. So then you got a bunch of rookies coming in. The good thing we have here is even when there's
don't serve for life, Carl. You go on and on.
Well,
the
but
police
the point
board
is,
too.
we have terms. We have 4-year overlapping terms, and so when you have a new governor, the governor can't come in and just fire a bunch of people. And if it's a Democrat succeeding a Republican, the Republican commissioners serve out, or the Democrats do. I mean, it's a nice, stable system. And the other thing I should mention is the salary hasn't changed since 1939. It's $2,400. And when the police board was initially installed, they were to be professional police managers, and they haven't changed that statute. So every other week I'd get a check for $85, and I don't think it's a bad deal for the citizens.
Okay, question here.
Hi, my name's Rick Smith. For Councilman Ford and Mr. Glorioso, you talked about the officer who brought in, they've been arrested 3 times. It seemed like to me you made a case that the police department actually knew who was in trouble and was making the proper arrest. So my question to you two is, what has not been responsive? How has the police department not been responsive to your needs, and how would that change under local control?
Let me explain it this way. I think it's a holistic approach, what we need to fighting crime. That it's just not the police department, it's the community, it's community policing, it's the court system, it's the prosecutors. And what we have now is we have the police department over here, insulated. And give you an example. At our headquarters building, we were having a real problem with prisoners who were faking illnesses. And because of what happened a couple years ago, the policy is someone says, I need an ambulance, they call 911, the fire department responds, and that was the #1 area in the city for fire calls. They then transport them to Truman, where they then walk out of the back of the ambulance. And this happened repeatedly, and I don't know how long it was going on before it was brought to the attention of the city officials. And as soon as we found out, we came up with a solution of hiring a nurse at the jail. So, I mean, it's that kind of disconnect that I'm talking about. Public safety is more than the police department, but the police department is the most important aspect of that.
One of the things you talked about, Ed, just to stay with you for a minute, is the fire department. And one of the things you also hear all the time is the fire department's political influence in the council, and that if you went to local control, the police officers, either through organized labor or some other method, would be able to have that kind of influence. Do you think that's right? And Steve, you could talk about that.
That's part of our system, Dave, like it or not. We have developers who have too much control. We have development attorneys who have too much say. We certainly have union officials from the fire department that have, I think, too much control, but that's part of the democratic system. It's certainly not a perfect system, but it's the best self-governance system we have.
Do you feel like you should be, I don't want to, this may sound bad, exempt from democratic control?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely. And I smile when I hear Ed use holistic. I really do, because I think the first time anybody heard holistic came out of my mouth when I was actually going for the chief's job. I think you heard that speech.
Yeah.
And the guys out here that worked for me, they probably got tired of hearing about holistic policing, but you've heard it from me all the time about holistic policing, and I believe in it. And I certainly believe in what that means. The point that I'd like to make, though, and I want this to stick with everybody in this room, everybody here is familiar with PIAC, the Public and Safety, or Public Improvement, okay, about what that's all about. And there's a big, well, not so much big anymore, but a pool of money. And every council person has a representative on that committee to make sure that it's tried to get divided equally the best way they can, or come up with a strategic way to spend the money. And it's always an interesting discussion, sometimes heated, most of the time heated.
What's the alternative, Jim? Not have a PIAC committee and just...
No. Yeah. Let me get there. I subscribe that you do not want your police department cut up and divided like the PIAC committee, because if I am representing the Northland, as a politician, I'm going to want just as many resources as my colleague over in the 3rd District.
But if you're in the Northland now, you can't make that case, and therefore you don't get the policing you want? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not true at all. But what I'm saying, it's going to be a political bloodbath over the department resources.
We got another question here.
Just real quickly, Dave, if I may respond to that. I hope everyone keeps in mind that in Kansas City we have 6 in-district council people and 6 at large. And as one of the at-large ones, I care as much about what's going on in the other 5 districts as well as my own, and I have to. When I run for re-election, I run citywide. So we're not that parochial, Jim, on either PIAC, or certainly wouldn't be that way on police resources.
Here we go.
I've been present.
Yeah.
Give and take is part of
My name is BJ Atkinson, and I'm concerned about how local is local control. You spoke earlier about community policing and whether that was still in effect or not. In our local community, we do have community police officers, but we don't have say to what they're about, because they can be pulled by their captains or majors or whomever.
So, you're saying, BJ, you'd like to have some more voice in that?
For local control.
Right, okay. Jim, you want to take that, or maybe Carl? What about someone in a neighborhood who says, well, I'd really like to improve north of the river, south of the river, but I can't because I don't have an impact on who represents me?
Well, you know, and I'll have the professional here talk, but to the lady's question, you know, you can't deprive a major or a captain from allocating their resources. They have to do it fairly. And I mean, I know that when I've gotten calls and I've felt that a citizen was making a good point, I mean, I went out to the CAN Center or whatever, and I talked to the major, I talked to the chief too, and say, you know, what are we doing here? Because we got people that are dissatisfied. So I understand the point. But you know, you can't make, you know, if you start doing special favors for one district, you've got to be careful what you're doing other places. And I think by and large, I understand what you're saying. I think we've tried to be responsive to that. Could we do more? Yeah, we probably could, but I hear what you're saying.
And that's not the problem. The problem, I guess, for us would be communication. One day they're gone.
Jim, you want to talk about that?
No, that's a great point. That's really the bottom line of where we have our problems is in communication. But I know when I was there, and I think Chief Forte is doing exactly the same thing we've done for years. Each one of the patrol division commanders, they run those divisions like they're the police chiefs of those geographic areas. And they are very familiar with every citizen group in that community, and they disperse the resources accordingly. When they see problems, when we go through the analytical statistical information on crime, and they sit down with those community people and basically allocate resources with that community.
You know, go ahead, Steve, let me ask you this, and then you can fill in quickly. You know, I think Jim is suggesting that police officers do like a certain degree of autonomy, which maybe the police board system facilitates. And you've heard tonight, the buy-in from retired and current members is not very strong to local control. Can you change that? Do you have to change that? Can you talk about that? Change that attitude. I say you do if you
Change
go
the attitude. Say that
against local control by the rank and file, by retirees. It's like very clear here tonight that the police department doesn't like this idea.
Yeah. Well, I've never been to a forum. I remember debating Stacy Daniel Young, a previous board member for the NAACP a year ago, December. And there were several police officers show up, but the NAACP did endorse local control or sent a letter to the Jeff City, urging them to pass a bill or promote a bill. So I think that would be a cultural change. It just, change happens, we see it all the time. But I thought, Jim, I don't want to gig Jim. When I heard him talk about how there was all the, he had all these, what'd you say, there were little chiefs into themselves. Well, you were.
No, I didn't say little anything. No,
okay.
No.
Well, I mean, how did you say that? They were chiefs.
They are
had
chiefs
divisions.
over the geographic areas.
Right. So you were very much in favor of local control, because that's exactly what you were doing. You were making the officers and the people that manage that officer close to the people that they were sworn to protect. And again, this idea that we have and Carl's a great example. We've had great commissioners and we've had some really mediocre commissioners. And I think that, again, you can't make change based on individuals. I remember there was a chair not long ago who said something I'll never forget. It was frosted a lot of us. They were debating, I think it was the merging of the jail, which was that part of what you were talking about? They went into the county jail, there'd be medical services.
Actually, the holding cell.
But anyhow, we had the chairman of the police board tell our council people to stop calling the police commissioners and talk only to the chief. And what that said to me was that police commissioner had not a clue why he was there. He's there to represent us, not the police chief, not the policeman. That insulation creates problems. And for someone who's there to represent the public by way of a governor who lives, clear across the state, we've only had one local governor in my lifetime, is like, whoa. But at the same time, Pat McInerney, Carl Zobrist, and others, Angela, have been very good police commissioners. But we don't always going to have that.
John,
maybe because they're Democrats, that may be.
We're going to wrap up here in a minute, but John Sharp, City Council.
Thank you. I get to talk all the time anyway. I just want to make a quick observation. I've always philosophically thought there should be local control of basic city services, whether it's water, fire, or the park department, or police. But I have to say that I have never seen the degree of cooperation and communication between the city and the police department that we're seeing now. And I think we really do have very good communication. As chair of public safety, I go to every police board meeting, have an opportunity to tell the board some of the things we're doing Our committee meets every week. Every week we have a member of the police command staff to come there and talk to us and talk to the citizens through Channel 2 about the things they're doing in their division. We've gotten a lot of ideas for new ordinances to close some of the loopholes in our ordinances to make our law enforcement more effective, and Councilman Wagner and I have introduced and got a lot of those passed. Now we have the Kansas City No Violence Alliance, where you've got close cooperation between the county prosecutor, the U.S. attorney, the FBI, the ATF, KCPD. So there are a lot of good things happening as far as that cooperation. It does make it a little more difficult to work with an agency that's not actually part of your unit of government, but it still can be done. It's being done. But there are ways that you can have local control and still have, I think, an insulation from political influence, such as a locally appointed police board, where the only difference would be the mayor might appoint rather than a governor who, you know, lives halfway across the state. But I did want to say that people shouldn't think that we don't have a lot of communication and cooperation, because I think we do. And I'd also like to say, if we think we're going to get legislation passed in Jeff City to give us local control, I think we better realize that if the FOP opposes it, because we try to take over their pension, I think our chances of getting that through are slim and none. They had to keep their state-controlled pension in St. Louis to get it through. I think we just have to realize that's a political reality in Kansas City, too.
Thanks, John. That's maybe a good, okay, one more, and then I think we can, two more, and then I guess we can wrap up. Your name, ma'am, is?
Delmito Corliss. I just want to say that in listening to everything, that we forget about citizen participation. It's not about mayor or the commission, because on the commission, you don't have a citizen who's neutral on there. And when you have meetings, and I've enjoyed going to them, the police commissions, if the police chief is sitting there, you can't ask them a question. So you may want to consider making that more. I know that the commission meetings are for the police, and that's understandable because they have to do their business. But if you're going to have citizens to make comments, they should be able to ask questions. And also, as I said, it would make it more participation with citizens. I just want to say something about, we've gone around in circles and circles about policemen walking the beat, which is great, policemen living in the area in which they serve, and policemen who are residents of Missouri instead of out-of-town policemen. I think those are going to make the difference between citizens feeling closer to the policemen. And we have a lot of good policemen here, but people feel they're riding in cars and not walking the beat. It's not the policemen, because the policemen don't make the laws. It's always about budget. But I'm saying that we need citizens' participation more in everything, and that's why I believe in local control. It brings us closer to the police so that you can have more cooperation from citizens in their districts.
Jim, you want to talk about that a little bit, because I think we're right. The police, it's clear the police department isn't very interested in this idea, but it's also clear here in the neighborhood people that they feel a disconnect between their most important city function and what they face every day.
I apologize for the police officers in the room because they've heard this speech before, but I'll give it again. Sir Robert Peel is the founding father of community policing. And what he said, basically, the community is the police and the police are the community. That's as simple as it gets. And you don't have a safe community unless you have full involvement with the citizens of Kansas City and the police department. That's the way it works. And when we have full cooperation with our citizens and our police officers, then we have the so-called the panacea of public safety, and that's what we all try to get to.
Yes, sir. Last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. My name is Kelly Martin, member of the board of Citizens Association. In fact, I think there's probably no topic more important to the city than this particular one in this time frame. And in fact, I take pride. I think I was the one that suggested to our board that we hold this forum on local versus state control of the police department. And I really think that this, an effective police department would probably work under either system of control if it's properly structured. But the system we have appears to me to work pretty damn well. And I think everyone really needs to carefully examine this. And if you haven't read the book, The History of Organized Crime in Kansas City from 1900 to 1950, by the former chief of the Organized Crime Strike Force in Kansas City for the FBI. He's retired and lives in Johnson County, and I'm sorry I've forgotten his name.
Bill Owsley.
Yeah, Bill Owsley. You should read that, and he really discusses how the problems developed and then how they were later solved. But he makes a statement that at one time there were something like 150 or more convicted felons serving on the Kansas City Police Department. So now we've come a long way from the 30s and early 40s when we had the open city with gambling and prostitution and organized crime. Not that we still don't have some of those issues, but we need to be very careful before we change the system that we have. I think I'm probably on the middle of the fence and maybe leaning a little bit toward the system that we have in place.
Okay, we're going to wrap up now. I'm going to give every member of the panel a minute or two to sort of sum up their discussion and sort of make whatever points they want. Since we started with Carl and went down, Steve, we'll start with you and go the other direction.
In the when we did the campaign for St. Louis, we did a poll, of course, 68% of the people of Kansas City in that poll wanted local control. Now, we can disregard what the people of Kansas City want. There was only like 22% that wanted to keep the current system. Pretty strong statement. Then when they had a chance to go to the ballot box to a little bit narrow issue, what St. Louis would be doing, it was 70%. So I don't think that's unimportant because you need buy-in by the public, for the police to be effective. And being the old codger I am now, I can certainly remember as a young kid working in 1970, I believe it was, for local control of Jackson County government. We had home rule. We had to go to the state to do everything. We had to go there to tell us how we assessed property, how we collected taxes, how we did all sorts of things, and we went for home rule, where the government is now run by the people of Jackson County. So I think every time you give the voters a chance to express the opinion of whether they want to have their elected officials, the ones they get to vote on, and hold accountable, run any part of government, they always side on the side of that democratic principle.
Okay, great. Jim, let's do you next so we sort of go Jim, and then Ed, and then Carl.
Actually, I had some comments I was going to say, but I'm going to hit on what Steve is saying, and he's absolutely right, Steve, about people should be engaged in their government. Absolutely should be engaged in their government. The statistics that you cite are astronomical, actually. When you have 70%, you say, of the statewide vote said that they wanted control of the local police department in Kansas City, or in St. Louis. That's astounding. That's an astounding number. But as you can see tonight, the people that are engaged with their government are you. We don't have everybody in this room being educated on what this is about. And that's what the word has to get out to see exactly what we're talking about. Because on the surface, why wouldn't you want to have control of your police department? Duh. What we're talking about is the difference between local political control and local control. And I think we need to spread the word and let everybody know what we're talking about. So the population of Kansas City, Missouri, or the state of Missouri can actually be educated when they cast that vote, other than just casting a vote for something that sounds good. And I think democracy, citizenship, is a right we enjoy, but it also comes with responsibility, and we need to know and understand what we're talking about.
Ed?
We have, as I said earlier, a fine police department. We've had a fine board, have a fine board, but we have a crime problem in Kansas City. And it impacts every aspect of local government, from economic development. I go back to the question I asked at the beginning. What is it about Kansas City residents that make us incapable of governing our own police department? What makes the citizens of Riverside, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas, or now St. Louis, that they're capable for self-governing, but we have to rely on a governor to appoint the police commissioners? And while I agree with Jim that the present system insulates from elected officials, I also believe it insulates you to a certain degree from the community because we are the community's elected representatives.
Carl?
The police board was set up is one of 3 reform movements in the state of Missouri. The first was to elect a reform government in Kansas City. That was done. The second thing was to develop the Missouri Court Plan, where we do not elect all of our judges, but our senior judges go through an appointment system that is based upon merit and their professional experience. And the third element was that of the police board. And what I would say is for 70 years, this has served this city very well. We have issues today with the water department. We have an elected board of education that is not serving us well. We have other issues in city government. We have stagnant economy. We do have a crime problem, but the crime problem is well within the management of this department, which is more than any other that I see in this city, the best functioning department, closest to the people, and a model of integrity. You cannot put a price tag on integrity. This is what we have. When you give this up, you will never give it back, and you'll never be able to understand all the good times that we already had for 70 years of a non-corrupt professional police force in this community.
Okay, now we can all applaud this because they did a great job. Before I turn the mic back over to Dan real quickly, we'll be out in just a second. Let me just say quickly, I appreciate your patience, great questions. I've been a reporter in this community since 1984, almost 30 years now, and I'm very old, and I'm always astonished at how involved Kansas Cityans are in their government. I mean, to come out on a night like this and really, at the beginning of this process, not the end, you really deserve a real kudos for your involvement. So I appreciate that. I thought before I came I might do like a Nick Haynes impression, which I'm not really good at. But instead, let's dedicate tonight's discussion to our friend Walt Bodine, who always said, let's talk about these things. Okay? Dan.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much. I think this was a great evening. Did you all enjoy the evening? Did you learn something new? Yeah, okay. Well, listen. We're serious. We want you to be members of the Citizens Association. We've left these very simple forms for you to fill out at each chair. We'd love to have you as members of the organization. We do these forums 4 times a year. The next one is in July on Kansas City International Airport, going from 3 to 1 terminal. And in October, we're doing one on border wars between Kansas and Missouri for jobs with all the tax incentives with no net new benefit to anyone. Gentlemen, thank you again. They'll stick around to answer questions. We're all going to retire. Everyone is welcome. Social hour at Anton's Tap Room, 1610 Main Street. 1610 Main Street. Come on down and relax and talk to the panel. Thank you all.